The saying goes that opportunity knocks, right? And I think that is true. But my addition to that is you have to be dressed and ready to go out the door as soon as opportunity knocks, because it's not going to wait around. I can say that that's the work I did, is I was ready.
Think you're too old to build a composition career? Well, Heather Savage started her formal composition training at 37, well past the cutoff for most emerging composer programs. But today, she's got a world premiere on a program of the Arkansas Philharmonic alongside George Gershwin and Florence Price. And the way it happened? Well, it's going to completely change how you think about building opportunities as a composer. In this conversation with Heather, you'll discover how she turned a single orchestral recording into a career opportunity that found her, why owning your recordings creates value that performances alone can't give you, and the dressed and ready strategy that she used to let a 30-year-old connection turn into a professional premiere, all without a single cold email or competition submission. Heather studied with me in the Wizarding School back in 2023, where she wrote and recorded an orchestral piece called Arethusa with the Budapest Art Orchestra. What she did with that recording and what happened as a result shows exactly why the old win competitions and answer calls for scores approach isn't the only path forward. In fact, it might not even be the best path. Let's talk with her. My guest today is composer Heather Savage. Heather, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I consider myself a musician in general, but my career is three-pronged. I am a pianist, I'm an educator, and I'm a composer. So I like having a balance of all those three things in my life. I've been a musician pretty much all my life. I started taking piano, my dad taught me when I was 3. And when I was 13, I decided I wanted to pursue music professionally. But then I took a detour because I went to a state school for music that was not a good match for me. And I got very frustrated in the music department. And I had to make a decision whether I was going to transfer to another school and go into a lot of debt or switch my major. And I decided to switch my major. So I ended up with a BA in music and elementary education. And I immediately knew that I missed music tremendously, but I didn't have the time or money to go back and get a full Bachelor of Music. So after graduating, I got married, we had children. I taught piano a little on the side, accompanied high school choruses, and, did some musical theater pits and things like that. But when I was 37, I said I have to, because I originally had wanted to do composition and I had dabbled in composing, but I never had any formal training. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I have to have some adult conversation in music. I need to get some training in composition. And I went to New England Conservatory because they had a continuing education program. So I did that for maybe a year and a half. I went up to Boston for that. And then in 2016, I started getting more work as an accompanist. So I was accompanying choral groups, community choruses, and I also started, because I had taken some composition lessons up in Boston, and that's when I say I started composing in earnest, that now I had some knowledge about what I was doing. I wasn't just dabbling, and I had some more direction. And at that point, I began sending my scores out to calls for scores because I really didn't have any personal connections to lean on in the professional music world to say, hey, you want to perform my piece? So and things were happening. I got my piece, Daughter of the Stars for String Orchestra, was premiered in Manhattan, and it got second place in the American Prize for Composition. But that happened in 2020, right as everything was shutting down for COVID. And I had a piece that had been accepted into a festival in Brazil, but of course that was canceled too because of COVID. And so everything that any connection that I had developed, any opportunities that had started to come about just disappeared. And I didn't have really any connections to keep me afloat during that time period. So like anything like, oh, I'm just going to do online concerts. And that just was not an option. I did not have an audience. I did not have connections. So when things started to get back to normal and these calls for scores started opening up again, I started sending my stuff out. And another thing that I had learned along the way was that at 37, when I had taken my first composition lesson, I had already aged out of most of the emerging composer opportunities. And even though the age limit has, creeped up, it's always a few years younger than what my current age is, because it seems to be related to how old millennials are. And I am a young Gen Xer. So there's that little gap there. So I was just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, sending scores out to places and hoping that people would be interested in playing my work. And I got a couple of connections, but nothing that was really developing into anything that was, I'd say, concrete. And then I learned about Joseph's program, the Wizarding School, and took part in that. I think that was 2023. And that was I had taken lessons up at New England Conservatory, and they were very, very good. But what helped me with Joseph's program was just getting another perspective on composing, but also the opportunity to get a piece recorded and to be able to, especially an orchestral piece, because up until that point, even like my piece for string orchestra was just strings. I had never written anything for a really large ensemble, certainly not a full orchestra. So the opportunity to write for all the instruments like that, to be able to hear it, to get it recorded, has been very helpful. So, and then we decided we were going to move out of Rhode Island, and I applied to Appalachian State University. I thought, well, if we're going to move, this is a good time for me to actually get my master's degree. And I went to App State because I love the mountains. I did not want to go to the city. And I also was not looking for a really intense environment. And App State is just really, really warm and nurturing. And they gave me a full scholarship and fellowship with a stipend. So I said, hey, that's a good deal. So we came down, and I graduated in May, and now I'm an adjunct professor there. And I'm getting more work as an accompanist in this area. And I have a couple of performances. Actually, it's going to be the world premiere of the piece that I wrote when I was in Joseph's program, Arethusa, for full orchestra, and it's going to be premiered by the Arkansas Philharmonic. That's coming up in February.
That's awesome.
So,
thanks for sharing that journey. It's really cool. Yeah. I don't know that I've actually ever heard the full thing from beginning to end, so it's cool to hear all the pieces and how they all fit together. One of the things that was standing out to me is that, along the way, you had several different frustrating moments, right? So you had, like, in college, you weren't quite getting the training that you want. And then the pandemic happened and you weren't able to get the kinds of connections that you were facing. I kind of want to, explore some of these pivotal moments, which kind of go moment to moment, and just dig into, well, what was the frustration and how was it that you were able to find some solutions to these things? So let's start in college. So you're an undergraduate. Mm-hmm. What was it that you found frustrating about the training that you were receiving at the time?
Yeah. And I really, I don't want to bash my school.
Oh,
I'm not going to mention where I was
we've been
going,
there. Yeah.
but it was not at that time. I knew that I didn't want a really competitive program, but this was also the school that my parents were like, this is where you have to go if you want us to help you with school. And it was not it was not full of students at a high level of musicianship. So I had been playing piano since I was 3 and had known like all my scales and chords and all this theory for ages and ages. And so when I was going to theory class and 6 weeks after we learn a major scale, that my classmates can't spell a D major scale, and I was just like, why am I here? And I also got frustrated with, my primary instrument was saxophone, and I did not like my teacher. And so there were several different things like that I did not feel like it was a good fit for where I was at as a musician. And I also was experiencing a lot of, not from the music department, but from other people in my life, including spiritual advisors who were telling me, well, being a musician is selfish and you should do something that actually helps people. And all of this combined together, I just couldn't handle it. So I ended up switching my major. So that's kind of what happened in my undergrad.
That's really tough. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, it was a tough period. Yeah. But thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that a lot of people can relate to it, though. I mean, I certainly had, challenges that I faced as an undergrad. I think that part of it is just that time of life, like
It's a
there's
very
something.
vulnerable time of life. Yeah.
So yeah, it's vulnerable, and you kind of know, you have an intuition of what you want to do, but you're not fully sure. And then you have like parents, and then you have other authority figures in your life that, are maybe pushing you in this way or the other, and it can be kind of challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a conversation with someone the other day about going back to school as an adult. When I got my master's degree, which I was 47 when I started that. It's totally different because I went and I'm like, I know what I want to do. I know what I want to learn. I basically could go in a sense, respectfully in everything, but I could go in and tell my professors, this is what I want. This is what I want help with. This is where I want you to help me get to. And in a lot of ways, I think that was helpful to them to say, oh, now I know how to advise you, or, different things where I'm like, I know I want to do this for a project, or you're learning how to do research and you're like, I know that I need to learn how to find this. And it's a lot different than when you're younger and you don't know all these things, and so you're just kind of caught up in the current and all these expectations and hoops you have to jump through, and you don't really know how to kind of form your own path through that because there's so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really the challenge. And I think it kind of resonates with where you were when you started composing, where because you didn't have that experience. And so, you're going to NEC, you're, taking these lessons, you have opportunities come up like the one that you had in Manhattan. And then the pandemic happens and things shut down. And where I'm going with this, right, is I'm thinking particularly about, I imagine there are going to be a lot of people that are listening to this and watching this and think to themselves, man, Heather is having her piece performed by, an outstanding orchestra in the United States, the Arkansas Philharmonic. That's an awesome achievement. And so they're probably wondering, and I think it'd be really cool to hear, what were the steps that took you from, okay, you started studying with me in the Wizarding School. What was helpful there? What were the steps? Kind of walk us through what led to what in order to get that opportunity with the Arkansas Philharmonic?
Yeah, well, I wish I could take a lot of credit for this, but I can't. And I can say that what the saying goes that opportunity knocks, right? And I think that is true. But my addition to that is you have to be dressed and ready to go out the door as soon as opportunity knocks, because it's not going to wait around. So I can say that that's the work I did, is I was ready. And I got ready by, through the wizarding school and, taking advantage of the opportunity that came up with, being able to write this piece for full orchestra and get some lessons, get a recording done, and then making sure that people knew I was busy working. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm committed to my composition. I'm committed to keeping working on my composition and letting people know, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm up to. My piece, I didn't even know the Arkansas Phil existed. The reason why my piece is being performed by them is because a friend of mine from high school that I was in band with, that I had not talked to in 30 years, was on the board of the Arkansas Philharmonic, and he somehow in my being out there and saying, hey, I'm working and this is what I'm doing and this is the recording and all this stuff, he noticed and presented it to the conductor of the Philharmonic. And that's how it happened. So I did not try to seek this out, but I was found busy. That's what I can say happened, is that I was dressed and ready to go, waiting and keeping myself ready and working. So
yeah, I love that. It's I think sometimes we wish that it's like, oh, let's be proactive, but I think that there is something really cool and proactive about what you're doing. Like you said, opportunity came knocking and you were ready. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that, even if it isn't like well, I went and I talked to the Arkansas Philharmonic person and I sent them all of these follow-up emails. It wasn't any of that, but it was still like what you said. I think that's really cool. Let's explore this a little bit. So you're studying with me, you're recording with the Budapest Art Orchestra. What were some of the things that you learned in the process of writing that piece with me and then having the recording? Like, what were some of your big takeaways from doing that?
yeah, I learned a lot about orchestration. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the specific qualities of the instruments. I've had a lot of experience playing in ensembles, so I was familiar with what each instrument could do. But the kind of the role of doubling in the orchestra, in an orchestra setting, and how to combine the different instruments, especially, getting the full texture to be what would be best in that setting by doubling, especially the woodwinds, some of the string tremolos and things like that I have in my piece, and thickening things in enough, understanding how to ensure that lines are going to be heard and that they're going to have enough power in specific sections. So that the combining of the instruments in a way that's going to be most effective, I felt like that was what I really got out of the experience.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like you said, oftentimes when we talk about orchestration, we mean this as code for something that's more like instrumentation. What do the instruments
Mm.
do? How do you write them? But like you said, orchestration, a lot of it has to do with, well, how do you make it sound good in the orchestra? Be somewhat simplistic about it, right?
Right. Because, I mean, the orchestra, as, you know, it's its own instrument. Like you have the individual instruments, but then thinking of the orchestra as an instrument and the different aspects of that instrument. So I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So you wrote Arthusa and you got the recording. And obviously, again, you mentioned another major part of this was that you're letting people know that you were working. So what
Yeah.
did you do to put that piece up online and make it such that your acquaintance from, 30 years ago could find it?
Yeah, I mean, I put it up on YouTube, put it up on my website, put it up on SoundCloud, shared it on Facebook and other social media. And I think just that because the recording is an asset I own, so I can do whatever I want with it. And yeah, I just kind of try to plaster it everywhere that I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the recording is an asset that you own. Why
Yeah.
is it that you mentioned that? How is that different from, say, I mean, even if the Arkansas Philharmonic plays your piece, like, why can't you just take their recording and plaster that up on the internet?
Yeah, well, because they, in every group and every group of performers is going to be different, but when they perform, that performance is their basically their intellectual property. And the Arkansas Phil's performance will belong to the Arkansas Phil. But because of the arrangement that we had through the wizarding schools, I paid for that recording. So it is a recording for hire that was made for me. So now I own the rights to it, and I am not taking advantage of anybody else's performance. Some performers will give you permission, or it's kind of a general agreement that you can use our work as long as you're not making money off of it. But some, like especially with large ensembles like this, it's a much trickier situation. So having a recording of an orchestral piece that I own is extremely valuable.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad thank you for explaining that because sometimes young composers they aren't aware of this. They aren't aware of the fact that particularly in the United States, unions and lawyers of these institutions, like they, for good reasons,
Hmm.
want to keep their recordings proprietary. And what that means is sure, you have this recording, but you can't necessarily share it anywhere. So I think it sounds like this is another key component of your story, where it's like not only did you have a good orchestral recording, you owned it, so you could share it a lot of
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So when is the performance?
February 7th.
Okay. Are you going to be going out there?
Yes.
That's awesome. And I'm actually kind of curious, like what else is on the concert with the performance?
Oh yeah. So I don't remember all the titles of the pieces. I know that there's a Gershwin piano concerto, a Florence Price piece, and a George Walker. I think that's his name. So it's an all American program, but I'm the only living composer on the program.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited about this.
Well, being with George Gershwin and Florence Price is really great company. So that's
Yes.
that's awesome.
Yes, it is.
Cool. So you mentioned that now you've graduated. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What are you working on next?
Yeah, so It's interesting because my orchestral stuff is relatively tame, but I also really like microtonal music, and I just got a grant. I got a grant in, like, I think it was October, November, it was official, to work on a microtonal chamber opera. So that is what I'm working on for 2026, is kind of like my big project. But I am going to be working with Kirsten Kunkel, who's the leading Native American soprano in the U.S., and she's going to help me with setting supporting the voices in a microtonal context, because obviously that would be a little difficult. So I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to work this out, but it's going to be soprano, mezzo, tenor, and baritone. And I think that tentatively it's going to be basically a Pierrot ensemble with some percussion. So that's my big project. And it's titled Mirrors. And so that's the big thing. But before I get going on that, which I'm probably going to start getting into that in March, basically. So before that, I'm doing more with the Wizarding School and going to be working on an oboe thing or something. So I'm waiting for more details about that. But so that's going to be a small project before my big project begins. And yeah, the whole year is basically filled out because this chamber opera is going to take all my attention.
That's awesome. That is very cool. So one last question, and then we'll wrap this up. So you've worked with me in 2023. You're working with me now again with this oboe composition intensive.
Yeah.
Particularly with the orchestral, on the orchestral side of things, who would you recommend doing the Wizarding School to?
Oh. I think that anybody who, I would recommend that people have a solid understanding of harmony. But if you're interested in composing, I don't think you need to have specific composition lessons. I think you just need to have an interest in composing, and you would get what you need from the Wizarding School. I mean, I personally think that not a good foundation in harmony is useful, but I know people will argue with me about whether or not that's needed for composing, but I think it's very useful. But you don't need a degree in music or composing. I think you just need a desire to compose. Yeah. That's
awesome. And any last thoughts that you want to share about your journey and where you've come?
I have found that, making the connections with people is the most important thing for, having success as a composer. I mean, other than like writing good music, I think you have to write some good music, but to see performances happen is really rooted in making connections with people, and that can happen in different ways. I've gone to a lot of conferences and festivals and things like that, and that's time consuming and expensive. But one of the other things has been getting into doing the Wizarding School is another way to make connections, and that has been very, very helpful. And I know I also did that other course that you had about like emailing people and things like that, which is also helpful. So I think you have a lot of good advice for aspiring composers. So not just about the actual composition process, which I think is very valuable, but also about getting established. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you For those who want to know more about that stuff, I'm going to put a link in the description down below. But Heather, thanks so much for taking the time to tell us about your journey, and congratulations again on getting your piece performed by the
Thank
Arkansas
you.
Phil. That is an amazing accomplishment.
I am very, very excited. Thank you.
Now, here's one more thing. Heather mentioned that making connections is the most important thing for getting performances, more important than sending cold emails or winning competitions. But how do you actually do that without being pushy or salesy? Well, I sat down with Joshua Haberman, one of the most respected choral conductors in the country, and asked him exactly what works when composers reach out to him and what doesn't. His answer might surprise you. It's not about having the perfect portfolio or the right credentials. It's about something much more simple. Click right here to watch that conversation.